In addition to the Alliance of Multilateralism, the guidelines for German engagement in the Indo-Pacific are surely a proof of our rethinking of our foreign policy and of our commitments towards our value partners, as you said, Ms. Lepel. But I think it is fair to say that the past Trump administration accelerated that process and pulled the EU and Germany out of its comfort zone. And I like to warmly welcome, under this tone, our participants tonight. And today, I'm very intrigued by the guest list, I have to say. And I also have to say that this event is very timely. Of course, I like to thank our speakers for doing much of the work tonight and for sharing their expertise with us. I am Rabea BRAUER, representing the other partner, the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation. CAS should be known to most of our participants because of our growing portfolio in the region, especially with the foreign and security policies. We experience that our work abroad becomes increasingly interlinked, and fair to say it is driven by mainly two powers, that is the US and that is China. We will give ample time today to the current developments in both of these countries, but of course, as it has already been said, our main question centers around what the other two countries, Japan and Germany, can do to support the balance of power, to maintain peace and stability, and to uphold the much appreciated international order. We have heard in the beginning by Mrs. Mönch and by Ambassador Lepel how crucial Japan's and Germany's role will become in the next years, maintaining multilateralism, in defending international law, and to sustain our democratic values. We may all agree that both our countries must deepen their cooperation, and yet the question is how. Both our esteemed parliamentarians, Mr. Wadefuhl and Mr. Yuichi, whose video message you may have heard in the beginning, they have already illustrated that it takes intensified political and parliamentary exchange, and that a deepened cooperation on security issues is most important. How the latter can be achieved and what else should be done on both countries' agenda to safeguard the contested international order, I will discuss today with our three experts. So I'm very thankful for having them here tonight. Thanks for having joined us, Professor Yuichi HOSOYA from the Keio University in Tokyo, Professor Hans MAULL and Dr. Markus, both from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, called SWP in Berlin. Being wary of the time, we have an hour only tonight. I will not go into the full biographical detail of our widely known and much respected speakers, only that much. Markus is an expert on transatlantic security relationship, the one that is currently under fire. His research includes NATO and the security policies of the NATO partners. He currently teaches in Zurich and in Berlin. And his voice and his face was seen, his voice was heard all across the media outlets in the past days when he was commenting on the US election. Yuichi HOSOYA teaches international politics at the Keio University. He was, amongst many other high-level positions, a member of the advisory board at Japan's National Security Council. Professor HOSOYA is the current managing and research director of the Asia Pacific Initiative. Hans MAULL is a very known, truly known expert to German and Japanese security policies, probably known to all of you out there. Plus, of course, he does extensive research on the evolution and the future perspective of the international order, to which he recently published. We will get into his two books later on in the discussion. Professor MAULL currently teaches at the Bologna Center of the Johns Hopkins University in Italy. And apart from his role at the SWP, he's also a fellow at the Mercator Institute of China Studies, called MERIX. How will we proceed today? We will divide the session into three parts. Of course, we will begin with the US election, and then we will continue to the disruptive powers and find out how authoritarian regimes posing a threat to our rules-based democracies. Further, we will discuss the necessities for intensified cooperation between Germany and Japan in order to see what both countries can and must do to safeguard the international order, given the disruptive tendencies. As for housekeeping, unfortunately, the Zoom chat boxes are closed for those who are watching us on YouTube. Not sure if you can reach out to us, but as Phoebe already said, please use your hand wave function. We will pick that up. We will be taking in direct questions from the audience, but I kindly ask you to stick to the subjects that we have discussed so that we do not jump back and forth in our subjects and make well use of our time here. Now, let us begin with an election that has been decided. This election has not only caused sleepless nights to many, but is already unprecedented in any possible way. The one question, of course, that most people ask themselves these days is, will Trump leave and accept defeat? So my first question goes out to Dr. KAIM, who also picked up on this in one of his interviews. Dr. KAIM, you rejected the idea that especially the Supreme Court could aid Trump in winning the election, given the tight and the contested results. Many have voiced concerns that the US is an eroding democracy and rule of law is threatened. What makes you think differently?
Good morning from Berlin and good afternoon from Berlin. And thank you for inviting me. Let me make 3 quick points. The first one is, actually, I'm surprised about the, how to put it, resilience of the US society and the political system, because actually we expected a totally chaotic and controversial electoral process, but that actually didn't happen. What we did expect was some kind of chaos in the electoral process as such, from the technical side, from the organizational side. And what we have seen was an election which was conducted very orderly, under very difficult, very different circumstances caused by COVID-19. So what we were expecting was more irregularity in the electoral process from the technical side, that the electoral staff would have been overwhelmed by the ballots given to it, and actually what we have seen was an election which did not have more irregularities than the federal German election in 2017. There might have been some minor irregularities, but more or less the electoral process, the electoral system has been proven very stable. The second point I was more or less surprised is the lack of violence. Actually, we expected after the weeks and months of talk by the US president encouraging his followers to check the electoral process, to visit ballot boxes, and to use and the number of violent incidents over the last couple of weeks. Actually, what I was afraid of was that we would have seen more violent incidents in the context of the election process. I wouldn't have been surprised if we would have seen one ballot box burning somewhere in Florida, which would have given the Trump administration even more reason to doubt if everything was correct. So if you take the 2 points together, I would say the system, the electoral process, and maybe even in a wider sense, the US society is more mature in terms of the political process, more mature than we would expect, and more mature maybe than the political leaders they've elected. Which brings me to my third point, and which is the part of the answer to your question. There's widespread talk, not only in Germany, but in the United States as well, that the appointment of federal judges would have been and would be some important tool of the Trump administration to implement certain policies. And that rests on the assumption that appointed judges are more or less some kind of, let's put it bluntly, puppets of the administration. That they're simply following the ideology, the political opinion of these presidents, which they have been appointed by, and that has never been really the case. We have a couple of a huge number of examples in which judges appointed by a certain president afterwards decided in several cases against the stated opinion of the president. And we've seen this with President Trump as well. Even before Amy Coney Barrett, he has already appointed 2 federal judges. Actually, he has appointed 200 federal judges, but 2 for the Supreme Court. And in particular, these 2 have been very critical to certain policies of the Trump administration. Just recently, a couple of days and weeks before the election, they rejected efforts by Republican parties from several states to change the electoral rules against the stated will of the president, against the stated will of the Republican majority. And therefore, that's another example in my mind that how resilient the US political system is, and difficult as it may be to believe, more or less, the checks and balances of the United States is still working.
Thank you very much, Dr. Keim. I'd like to stay with you and come to a subject that also concerns us quite a bit. The US seems to be torn literally in half between unbridgeable ideological differences. And healing, also as President-elect Biden said, healing has been a widely used term these days. Will the President-elect Biden be able to heal the nation, or are the internal rifts just past any cure? And also, my question to this, what legacies will the Trump administration leave for Biden to deal with?
That's a very good question and a very difficult question at the same time. I mean, the numbers are obvious. 71 million people in the United States have voted for Donald Trump. That is 4 million more than 4 years ago. So it would be simply wrong to assume that Trumpism is over. And I don't want to be unfair. Polarization in the United States did not start with Donald Trump. It started, let's say, in the 1990s with Newt Gingrich in Congress and the Clinton administration. Maybe even before that, some people argue it started with Richard Nixon. But let's assume it started 25 years ago. And every after election, we hear from the winner, now it's time for healing. Now bridges must be built, trenches must be covered, and at the end of the day, the trenches have become deeper than ever before. And if you visit the United States, if you participate in the political debates in the United States, it's more than obvious that not only the political class is divided, but the society is divided as well. That the political class has been divided has been illustrated by recent decisions about the appointment of federal judges, in which the decision was taken almost exactly along party lines. So there's no defection on one side or the other. So the old-fashioned idea of bipartisanship is, at least currently, more or less dead in Congress. And the rifts in the society are even more deeper, I would say, so that you have to realize that certain parts of the US society do not talk to each other and do not consider the other part of the aisle, the other side of the aisle, as in simply political opponent, but as a political enemy, or not even a political enemy, but an enemy as such. And it will be hard to heal these rifts. And to be honest, I'm rather skeptical how Joe Biden wants to do this. I appreciate his words about yes, will be the president for all Americans, not only for those who have elected him. However, I mean, the Republican majority in the US Senate and the Republican minority in the US House of Representatives will be encouraged by the number of voters who have voted for the Republican Party, the 71 million voters. So there will be ample reason for opposition and even destruction of the Biden agenda, which brings me to an important point. I think we should consider this as a real constraint for the incoming Biden administration, this growing opposition or continuing opposition towards any democratic political agenda. And even more so, if the Democratic Party moves left in political terms, if they move to those progressives which have supported Bernie Sanders in the election campaign.
Isn't it time to export our political party system to the US then? That would probably help the two rifts. But I would like to come to, watching the time, to the foreign policy angle. What can we expect from the Biden administration in terms of foreign policies concerning the EU and Germany? So in other words, what would happen to the tariff and trade conflicts and the typical Trump protectionism? Dr. KAIM.
At first sight, I think Joe Biden, and that has been emphasized all over again, is more easy to cooperate with for the Europeans, for the European and particularly for the German government, because he's an experienced foreign policy expert. He's familiar with Europe, and in particular, he uses words and concepts which are very compatible with European thinking. When he's talking about international order, when he's talking about international institutions, frameworks, cooperation, alliances, these are all the key words for German and European multilateralism, which is the cornerstone of German and European foreign policy. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the effects on this. I think given the fact that the Trump administration shares the assumption of the Trump administration that the US-China axis will be the key conflict in the years to come or even decades to come, I think it will be, we'll quickly see that the reinvigoration of the West in terms of values and interests also means that the United States is trying to integrate Germany and Europe into its fight against China, or maybe fight against China is too much, but let's say into its containment efforts or its containment policies. And therefore, the political room for maneuver for Germany and Europe towards China will become closer and more narrow than we have ever experienced, in my view.
Positive outlooks. Over to Japan, Professor HOSOYA. What does Japan expect from the Biden administration? Will we see another bromance like we've had with Abe and Trump? And how will the new Prime Minister Suga deal with the US? Welcome aboard, Professor HOSOYA.
Thank you very much, Rabea, for your kind introduction. And also, I'd like to thank the organizer of this event to make this quite timely event possible. First of all, I'd like to respond to the question about Japanese reaction. I can see quite broad relief and joy in seeing the victory of Joe Biden in the US presidential election. Interestingly, I think that Japan has the largest numbers of Trump supporters outside of the United States, perhaps among the liberal democracies. So they may miss the defeat of President Trump in the recent presidential election because they think that President Trump has created quite a strong US-Japan alliance. But basically, I see that even under the President Biden's administration, we can see the continuation of the strong US-Japan alliance. So that's why we can basically quite welcome the victory of Joe Biden. And there is a joke among those kind of Trump supporters in Japan about a picture of Joe Biden. Maybe they hope to invite Donald Trump as the next Japanese prime minister. But I would say that this is just a joke and a minority. Majority of Japanese people welcome that Joe Biden would bring multilateralism back in US foreign policy. And because Prime Minister Abe actually could create a very strong alliance relationship with the United States under Obama-Biden presidency. That's why the majority of Japanese politicians and also bureaucrats know well about the time when a Japanese government could create very strong alliance relationship with the United States and both President Obama and Vice President Biden. And another thing I want to mention is that the leadership style of Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga is different from Prime Minister Abe's style. So it means that there will be less summit meetings between President Biden and also Prime Minister Suga, because Prime Minister Suga usually likes to ask Foreign Minister Motegi to play a larger role. So Ministry of Foreign Affairs is regaining its influence in foreign policy making, because under Prime Minister Abe, Prime Minister's office was much more powerful in creating foreign policy. That's why I think that we can see much more traditional style foreign policy under Prime Minister Suga. But I think that the Prime Minister Suga fully understands the importance of continuation of foreign policy, which was created by Prime Minister Abe, because of course, Prime Minister Suga was at the center of Prime Minister's office as Chief Cabinet Secretary. And also, Prime Minister Suga fully understands the importance of both experts and also establishments within the government. And I think that the President Biden would use similar kind of measure to try to promote foreign policy by encouraging and returning power to those elites and establishment within the US government, like Department of State and the Pentagon. So they will create, I think, in a different way, a very strong alliance relationship with the new Biden administration. So this is my take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor HOSOYA. I like to get Professor MAULL on board. Warm welcome to you as well. And I'd like to address a question to you. Many leaders across the world have congratulated Biden very quickly, most of them being European, and we have noted, of course, the exception of a few. However, a wide sign, I'm not naming names now, a wide sign of relief was felt. Are the hopes justified, Professor MAULL, that the US would return to the treaties, be it the climate agreements, be it TPP or the nuclear proliferation? And will the US return to upholding multilateralism? And maybe you can also spare a word on the NATO and the future of that alliance. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, to the organizers for having me on this truly interesting, important, and timely event. And good afternoon to Japan and good morning to Europeans. I just want to pick up a little before answering your question on your observation about not all of Europe sort of heaving a sigh of relief at the election outcome. Clearly, democracy in the United States has turned an important corner. And clearly that has also had an impact on the populist movement in the rest of the world. And we have quite a bit of that populist movement in Europe as well. And Donald Trump was kind of the figurehead of a populist international, really. And therefore, this is an event which is important not only for American democracy, but also for the struggle for the survival of democracy worldwide. And that concerns us here in Europe as well. So it's far from over, but it is an important corner which we have turned now, which the United States has turned. And I would tend to come to your question, I would tend to take the extensive policy statements which we've had from Joe Biden and his impressive teams of advisors about their foreign policy intent at face value. I think this administration, once it is installed from January 20, I hope onward, will live up to its basic orientation towards a return to a multilateralist approach to the United States. It's already clear, Joe Biden has already made it clear, he wants to take the United States back into the Paris Agreement to contain climate change. He would be interested in reviving the agreement with Iran on containing the nuclear program of Iran. There's also an important decision to be taken in the World Trade Organization. We have tended to lose track a little bit of that, but I think this is one of the key multilateral institutions in the world we have, undergoing serious problems at the moment, headed for a new Secretary General, and the appointment of this new Secretary General, about whom there is widespread agreement within the WTO, has been blocked by the United States. So we can hope that a Biden administration would move on that, and we could sort of focus on reforming and bringing the World Trade Organization, WTO, up to speed. And you mentioned NATO. I have no doubt that Joe Biden will also take a more positive view towards NATO. He will want to revive the alliance, revive it, but also refocus it clearly, as we have mentioned already, as Markus talked about already, implicitly towards China. Of course, NATO has a geographically limited brief, but that doesn't exclude political functions, which NATO could assume and will probably have to assume more in the future. So in terms of the intentions and the declared policy objectives, I'm quite confident that this will be an enlightened administration in a liberal democratic sense. The big concern I have, and probably many of you have here, is will this administration be able to get this actually on the ground? Will it get traction with its policies? And there we first of all, the difficulties of transition, which are becoming more and more apparent, but more seriously than the question, and again, Markus hinted at that already, to what extent will Congress allow a Biden administration to govern effectively? And I think that is a key word here. We need not only multilateralism, we need effective multilateralism. We need multilateralism which gets tractions. And there are still many question marks about this in the United States and beyond the United States with its partners, not least Germany and Japan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will touch upon the multilateralism in a bit. I have one last question concerning this election, but we need to discuss that. It concerns the relations between China and the US. They have seen better times, but we all agree that the pressure that Trump's administration exercised towards China is much appreciated, especially here in Asia. And so far, no other country was willing or able to oppose China's aggressive behavior in the South, name it to be the South and East China Sea. What relation, in all of your opinions, this question goes out to all three, will China seek with the US? Will we see a continuation of the trade wars, or and will that political power play continue? So maybe Professor Mao, you just recently published in the Asia Nikkei the article. Maybe you go first.
Thank you. Yes, I think there will be continuity in the sense that the relationship between the United States and China will remain much tenser than it has been 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But I think there will be also an important difference in the way this competition will be played out by the Biden administration. It will use quite different techniques and instruments and policy tools, I think, from this past administration. I would like to point out in that context also that to some extent parallel to what happened in the United States, and not only, and I would even argue not primarily driven by the Trump administration and its policies towards China, there has been a change of heart in Europe about China as well. And I think this has been put very well by a policy paper produced by the European Commission, which talks about China as a partner, a rival, and as a systemic competitor. Now, the fact that China is all those three things at the same time, I think is something which the United States has recognized across the aisle, really. Democrats and Republicans on that are pretty much on the same sheet of paper. The differences are about what to do about that. And the Europeans, I think the majority of the Europeans, I should say, because unfortunately, the European Union is still divided on how to deal with China and how to approach it. But the majority view in Europe has moved towards this formula. We have to recognize that China is a serious challenge, a systemic competitor, a systemic rival, but it's also a partner. I mean, we cannot deal with global warming without cooperation with China. So we have to figure out policies, and that will be the challenge to both the Biden administration and to the European governments. How do we do that in practice? How do we, square that circle?
Wisely said. Professor HOSOYA, what is your take on the China-US relation? How will Japan accommodate? And yes, will this play into the hands, of course, of the German future Japan relation?
Thank you very much. My basic understanding is similar to what Professor MAULL already mentioned, and we will see the continuation of quite tough US-China policy, because in the last 2 years, many bills actually were drafted by Democratic Congress, because Congress was dominated by Democrats. So in that sense, I think that, tough China policy will continue, but in a quite different style, because as is already mentioned, there are several areas we will see some differences, like human rights issues. I will see that perhaps Biden administration will be tougher on human rights issues like Xinjiang and some other areas where human rights are seriously deteriorated. And on the other hand, there are some other areas such as climate change and trade, international trade, because if Biden administration want to stress on the importance of multilateralism, it is quite impossible for the US administration to promote it without having a support from China. But the other problem is that China is now looking down on the United States. Chinese leaders are now thinking that the United States is declining and losing because of the current COVID-19 crashes. That's why I would expect that the Chinese leader would, or government would respect much less US positions. So I think that unlike the years during the year of the Obama administration, in the Biden years, US administration will face much tougher China. So it means that the United States really needs cooperation from Japan and Europe. And I think that the Biden administration can get it, both Japanese cooperation and European cooperation. With those cooperation, Biden administration can be tougher and in a quite strong bargaining position. But still, I expect that negotiation with China will become much more difficult than before.
Dr. KAIM, would you like to add something?
I think the starting point of all is that I think the US-China policy and the EU-China policy have been more or less separated over the last 4 years under the Trump administration. And I think both sides are moving for different reasons. The Biden administration would move insofar as it appreciates more partnership, multilateralism, cooperation as such, and the Europeans are moving in substance, as Hans MAULL pointed out. They are about to change or are about to reconsider their China policy. So therefore, I would expect some high-ranking consultations and a common China policy as a really important issue, not only for the Europeans, but also for the Biden administration, some kind of transatlantic cooperation on China. And you see the first signs of it. I mean, just remember that NATO is already considering some kind of China, I wouldn't call it strategy, but China policy, something unheard of 20 years ago, and for obvious reasons unheard of. And I would expect something in the US-EU relationship at the same level, in the same direction. So I think we'll see way more dialogue, consultations about China. But don't get me wrong, that could end up with more difficult times for the Europeans. I wouldn't be surprised if the Biden administration expects more taking sides from the Europeans, taking sides from the Germans. And one example of is 5G and the integration of Huawei in the Western networks into the Western grids. The key question from the Chinese side would be if the West is ready to accept or respect the rise of China one way or the other. And obviously, the hope is that this is more expected by the Biden administration, because we have to keep in mind that there have been reports of election interference by the Chinese as well. And the CIA, or it was the FBI either or, emphasized that the Chinese election interference was tilting way more to the Biden administration side, to the Biden campaign. So obviously there's greater hope for cooperation with Joe Biden.
Thank you very much. We heard Angela Merkel, our chancellor, making already steps towards the Biden administration and promising for more engagement. So I think we will see a stronger relation now between our two states. I can clearly see we could have devoted this entire session to the US election. We will have to leave it now. And I would like to move our subject to our challenged international order. We've heard the ambassador picking up very important points. Professor MAULL, you've done an excessive amount of research, so I'll address you first with my question, but please both of you join in. In the past few years, we have witnessed authoritarian regimes like China and Russia, for that matter, pushing for an alternative order and sowing distrust in the existing order by setting new narratives, for example, and by influencing international institutions. And this is a growing concern. Ambassador Lebel said that already to our democratic societies. So, question here, what needs to be done to uphold our liberal Western values, or is it time actually to redefine the course of the liberal order? And in other words, are we settling into a readjustment of values? Professor MAULL.
My answer to that question is the most important things, and it may be a bit paradoxical, but I think the most important things, the most important efforts to rescue and develop further the liberal international order have to happen at home. And in that sense, what happened in the United States on November 3rd was very important. But if we want to safeguard and develop, adapt, as Ambassador Lebel said, I would go even one step further and say it has to be not only adapted, it has to be developed further on the basis of the existing foundations, this international order. We will have to, first of all, and most importantly, get our houses collectively and individually in order. And if you look at what happened to the international order over the last decades, one clearly has to conclude that the most important damage to this liberal international order was done by us ourselves, and importantly, the United States, really. I mean, you can clearly see how tremendously destructive the impact of one previous administration was. I'm talking here about the George W. Bush first 4 years in office. The second 4 years, lots of corrective actions were taken, but the first 4 years of the George W. Bush administration, the response of the Bush administration to the terrorist attacks of 9/11 had disastrous, had very far-reaching consequences in the direction of the erosion of the liberal international order. So we have to first of all, demonstrate that the principles and values which inspire this, and it is a universal, it's not just a Western, it's a universal international order, expressed in the organization, in the institutions of the United Nations and in the international legal documents, starting with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, we have this universal fundus. We have to take this seriously and build on that and demonstrate that we are doing this, we are taking this seriously in our own democracies. Then the next step on building on that is, I think we have to change our mindset collectively about international cooperation and recognize that the to practice effective or to realize effective multilateralism in a liberal international order is, under today's circumstances, a very demanding challenge. And it asks more of our countries and our societies than we have recognized so far. So it's ultimately, policy making starts with mindsets. And I think we need to fully understand the situation in which we are today, the challenges we are facing from authoritarian governments, China being the most important challenger here. It wants a seriously modified international order, building on the present one, but taking it into another direction. If we don't want to have that, we have to recognize that this will have a price tag. The price tag will have to be borne by our societies and our governments.
Thank you very much. Professor HOSOYA.
Thank you very much. For three reasons, I think that liberal democracies are facing serious difficulties. First, we are experiencing economic difficulties with a rise of unemployment in advanced liberal democracies, particularly under the COVID-19 crisis. So I think that China is using this case to defend its own regime, authoritarian regime. The second difficulty or challenge is the rapid rise of populism and the bipolarization of our politics or radicalization of our politics. In the United States, like BLM movement and some other conflict between the two radicals, we have seen kind of a deterioration of the quality of democracy because rational discussion and the compromise are becoming more difficult to create in many leading liberal democracies. This is a second crisis. The third crisis is difficulties in handling with coronavirus. I think that in Asian countries like China and others, they are handling with this coronavirus much better than a major liberal democracy like United States or UK or some other European countries. Of course, Germany can be an exception, but still, I think that China can engage a kind of propaganda war that liberal democracies are declining. It is not quite suitable to the current challenges. So we have to show the case that liberal democracy is strong enough to meet these challenges. And I think that Japan and Germany can play a very important role in doing this.
Thank you very much. We will pick that up, your last sentence, in a moment. Dr. KAIM, your take on the challenge to international order.
Maybe only two remarks. The first one is there's a sign for hope, and I think Hans MAULL explained it very eloquently. I think the election on November 3rd have been maybe not a death blow to international populism, but really a blow to populism in the international scene. At the end of the day, populism has to deliver, and Donald Trump could not deliver, in particular during the COVID crisis, and has paid the price. And I think that will be an interesting lesson for other authoritarian or kind of authoritarian rulers. I think of Brazil, for example, and other countries as well. On the negative side, I think for the time being, given the authoritarian tendencies in a couple of countries and in Europe as well, to be honest, I think we'll be confronted with an inward-looking United States. We talked about the number of votes for Donald Trump. I think we'll see in the United States in the years to come a more inward-looking administration, not so much an outward-looking administration. And the same case can be made for Europe as well. Although we would desperately need an outward-looking Europe shaping its neighborhood, although we would need desperately outward-looking United States shaping the international order, reviving the international order, I think we'll see more inward-looking, introspective administrations in the years to come. And this strategic vacuums will be filled by others, by Russia, by China, by Turkey, by Iran, and other countries as well.
I have one question concerning this. Do you see, Professor KAIM, Europe to be outward-looking in the next years and to become a strategic partner? to this region, to Australia, to Japan?
I think there are certain limits. I just mentioned the introspective mode. I think, like the United States, Europe will be preoccupied with coping with the long-term consequences of the COVID crisis. We heard Ursula von der Leyen saying or emphasizing this will be a geopolitical commission. We just heard over the last days many voices here in Germany emphasizing the need for Europe to step up to the plate, to play a bigger role on the international scene. But we are all old enough to remember these kind of sentences over the last 25 years, and not so much has been accomplished. Therefore, this gives me more skepticism, and in particular in the area of security defense. If Donald Trump did not trigger a proper response by the European Union in terms of accomplishing autonomy, if Donald Trump did not trigger the necessary steps in improving the foreign and security policy of the European Union to make it more effective, I have my doubts if a Biden administration will trigger these events.
Thank you very much for your opinion so far. I like to start our third chapter, which is about what Germany and Japan can actually do, and we will pick up on a few of your opinions when we talk about this. Before I continue with my questions to you about your opinions, what you would Japan and Germany to see doing, or what you would describe as what has to be done in order to form a stronger partnership, I like to call upon our ambassador Takahiro SHINYO. We are very, very honored to have him on board tonight, and he served as an ambassador to Germany. He was actually stationed there twice, so he knows our two societies very, very, very well. And I like to give him the floor first, and the first remarks on his judgment on where Japan, Germany can actually go together and form an alliance. I know he doesn't like that term very much, but this is what we need to safeguard the international order. So Ambassador SHINYO, are you ready? Warm welcome. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Prof. Well, I have carefully listened to the whole presentation of the three speakers, and of course the speech of the Ambassador Lippel. I would like to say that for Japan and Germany, we have to recognize that both Japan and Germany is no more a powers or great powers. Well, I think we have to admit that we becoming time after time the middle power. I would like to hesitate to say that the Japan and Germany is already middle power, but maybe semi-great power, and so that I have to recognize that this is the international stance of the both countries. And I was also very much a little bit surprised when I was ambassador for about 10 years. In Germany, there was a coalition government's agreement, and in this coalition, the government's agreement says that in Asia there was only two strategic partners, those China and India. What is about Japan? Japan is the country which shares a common value, and that's all. Period. So I think in order to discuss this issue, maybe I think we need to redefine our stance and our role in not only in the region, in each region, but also in the world. So we need much more the intensified the discussions on this issue. Number two is that the 20th century has been said it was a century to cope or to tame or handle Soviet Union, and this 21st century will be, of course, the age or the century to the tame or handle China, and in this case, in this sense, I would like to say that as some of you, some of the presentators already said that the China and U.S. confrontation, will be continued, and I quite agree to this. I think it is almost hopeless to hope that China will be coming to our order, that China will be integrated into the liberal world order. I think it is groundless hope, and it is too big to tame. It is too big to contain. So I think we should not better use the word containment of China, rather how to cope with China, or how to to live up with China. Maybe I think that might be the actual state of affairs. I think that I have to come to this. The next point is that the how to integrate the United States of America once again into the liberal world order. I think there is a hope, and well, it takes still time, and I think the democratic governance or the government will perhaps show a very flexible attitude in the first period, but maybe I think they will also face the actual the problems, and so that they will be also coming back once again. So I think we should be very prepared also for that. But I think we have the Germany and European countries have the a wonderful idea of alliance for multilateralism, and this should be strengthened. Well, frankly speaking, I think Japan is not so much fully committed to this, the alliance for multilateralism, just because of the Trump administration in those days. Stronger bilateralism was the case. So I do hope that the Japanese government will, coming back to the alliance for multilateralism, and in so doing, I think we should also invite United States to coming back to the alliance for multilateralism.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have, in addition to yours, a very precise question to to our speakers here, Professor HOSOYA, Professor MAULL. On either side, we have expectations towards each other, and I think the expectations on the Japanese side grew when the German side put out the Indo-Pacific guidelines. And for years, of course, Japan is asking for a ship and for joint exercises in the region and for more engagement. Of course, on the other side, Germany wants to see, I hear this from the parliament, more political engagement, and our two parliamentarians have stressed that. So a very precise question: what are concrete expectations that Germany should have towards Japan, or has, and vice versa, Japan has towards Germany? Professor MAULL.
Well, I find it interesting that the expectations of Germany towards Japan are only slowly recognizing the importance of the East Asian region, and only slowly recognizing the security dimension in that East Asian regional order. They're growing into this, but it's a slow process, I think, and I'm not sure whether I would be entirely happy with the evolution of this. But the expectations which Germany has towards Japan, I think, are mostly focused on the global challenges, issues like climate change, world trade, global health issues, and so on. And they would like Japan to become a still more important, prominent partner in efforts to bring those global challenges to make progress in meeting those global challenges. That seems to be the German perspective. And it's interesting when we look at the Indo-Pacific policy paper, or the papers by France and by Germany, they're really quite different in quality. I mean, the French paper is very much focused on security. And it really is like a European perspective of on the Quad and joining the regional security architecture in East Asia. The German perspective, the German policy paper has this dimension, but it's one among many aspects of this policy paper. And it's very much focused on the sort of the global challenges, the global issues. And I think both perspectives are understandable, but both also needs to be adapted and adjusted. And I think Germany is in a process of recognizing, as I said, the true importance of the East Asian region, and it therefore also recognizes that it has to do more to be present in this part of the world, not least also in security policy terms.
Very true. Very, very true. Professor HOSOYA.
Yes, I largely agree with what Professor MAULL already mentioned. And from the point of view of military issue or security issues or military engagement, of course, for Germany, East Asia is far away and Europe is far away from Japan. But if we look at the other issues like climate change or data governance, we are living in a global era. So particularly in two policy areas, one is green recovery and Green Deal. Recently, Japanese environmental minister Shinjo Koizumi, the son of Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi, he is focusing on the importance of green recovery. And his policy is taken by Prime Minister Suga because they are very close by Prime Minister Suga. So the green recovery policy is becoming a mainstream policy in the current Prime Minister Suga's administration. This is one thing. In this area, I think that Japan can collaborate with Germany. And secondly, data governance is really important issue for both Japan and Germany. And last year, between Japan and the European Union, two sides agree on the data-free zone with trust. And I think that the Japan and Germany or Japan and European Union can create a new standard like GDPR to adapt to the era of data governance. So in that sense, I think Japan and Germany can have many things in common to collaborate with.
Thank you very, very much for your precise ideas. We have reached, unfortunately, the end of our session. I have one last plea to you, of course. I like to have your outro statement. I want you to give the chance to have one last sentence to reiterate a point that you have made or something that still needs to be said that we haven't touched upon. We haven't touched upon on many subjects. We have left out COVID. It was heard here and there. But of course, this only brings us to the point that we have to continue talks like this, and hopefully maybe next year we will be able to meet all. So I like to thank you very, very much for your input. So I like to ask from you one sentence, what would you write, for example, into the policy books of each of our governments for a stronger alliance and or closer cooperation? Professor Keim, Dr. Keim.
Very simple. I think it's desperately needed to increase the role of the European Union in the international order. Therefore, it's desperately needed to create the capabilities for effective multilateralism of the EU, meaning to improve the instrument for common and foreign security policy.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Professor HOSOYA.
Well, thank you very much. I think that accidentally and unexpectedly, and to some extent unwillingly, both Japan and Germany need to fulfill its global responsibility. If both Japan and Germany wouldn't fulfill that responsibility, I'm sure that the liberal international order will be declined furthermore.
Thank you very much. To the point, Professor MAULL.
Yes, I second what Markus Keim said and what HOSOYA said very much. My own addition to that is we need to have a pushback against Chinese efforts to turn around international organizations, wherever that happens, and it happens in many places. World Health is an example, data protection is another example. There needs to be coordination among democratic nations against the efforts to subvert the international order from inside in the international organizations.
Thank you very much. To the point, all three of you. I am very grateful that you joined us today, and it was a pleasure to listen to you. It was a pleasure to moderate you. I do hope we can